So let's talk about the key characteristics of B2B marketing. Now, what I mean here, what makes B2B marketing special and how does it differ from consumer marketing? Now, one important thing to keep in mind is that these two areas, B2C marketing and B2B marketing, are not totally different. So a lot of the stuff that you know and have learned in a B2C setting, well, that also applies here, right? So part of the general idea of marketing, of finding out what your customers want and providing them with it, now that's an idea that holds across all markets. In a similar vein, we talked a lot about how people make decisions, what the biases in their brain are, what drives their behavior. Now, and obviously, it doesn't really matter if you're trying to sell people a can of Coke or if you're in the business of automotive supplies. Well, in both cases, you're dealing with people with the same strengths and weaknesses, right? So many of the stuff that we learned about how people make decisions in B2C settings, well, that also applies in B2B settings. Nevertheless, there's certain characteristics, factors, circumstances which are unique in a B2B setting that you don't have typically in a B2C setting, which make it worthwhile to talk about them and which also may change the nature of your marketing. So I've put them down here. We're not going to talk about all of them, but keep in mind that these characteristics, these circumstances change the way that marketing should be implemented in these markets. Probably the most important characteristic that distinguishes consumer markets from business-to-business market is something they call the derivative demand. Now, this means that if you're in B2B markets, selling your products and services to another company, what it means is that the demands for your product will also be always be derived on the basis of the demand of end customers. Now, again, this is easier to explain through an example. Now, let's assume you have a car company here, like BMW, that tries to sell its goods, its cars, on the end consumer markets. Now, these may be private car buyers, but may also be car rental companies or firms with vehicle fleets. Now, in order for BMW to be able to sell these cars, a lot of things have to happen beforehand. Now, keep in mind that BMW is part of a very complex and very extensive value chain. Right? Now, for instance, BMW doesn't produce all of the components itself. Now, they may be talking to a company like Bosch, which acts like a system provider for an instrument system. Now, obviously, Bosch doesn't do everything by itself, but for example, assuming that the system is made out of plastic, now they will buy the plastics needed for constructing the systems, they will buy that from a plastics manufacturer. Now, that manufacturer in turn, this manufacturer will need to source the raw materials, the granulate, from a different company. Now, all of these companies working one after the other to create value in order for BMW or for us to be able to drive a BMW. Now, let's assume you working for a company like Bosch and providing instruments for BMW. Now, who is your customer? Now, your customer, of course, is BMW, and that's the customer you need to make happy, but should that be your entire perspective? Now, probably not, because the demand for your systems is derived from the demand from BMW cars. Now, this has two very important implications for B2B marketing. Now, the first one being is, now, in order for you to be successful, it's not enough to just focus on the direct customer. You will also always need to have a good understanding of the end customer market, right? So if you're a company like Bosch working in providing instrument systems, now that means you need to have a very good understanding about how people, end consumers, people like you and me, how they make their choices regarding cars. Now, because only if BMW can sell enough people to end customers will they be able to buy these systems from you, right? So meaning if you want to be successful, now you need to make sure that BMW is also successful on their markets, right? That's point number one. Point number two is equally important, which means that changes in the markets are typically handed down the entire value chain. So for instance, let's go back to cars. Let's stick with the car example. Now, one common concern in the car industry when people buy cars is that cars just consume too much fuel, right? So cars need to become more efficient. Now, what's one possibility to use less fuel, to use less gas? Well, one possibility is you don't drive as fast as a consumer. Now, this seems to be difficult to implement, especially in Germany, where people really like driving their cars very fast. Now, another possibility to reduce fuel consumption is to make a car lighter, right? So the less a car weighs, the less petrol it will assumably consume, right? Now, a company like BMW, being aware of the fact that the car needs to be lighter, what are they going to do? I mean, they're going to look for ways to improve the cars on their end of the development process. Now, but they're also going to hand down all these requirements down the value chain. So meaning BMW will then go to their providers, their suppliers, and will say, well, listen up. Our cars are way too heavy. They consume way too much fuel. The systems or the components that you provide are too heavy. You need to find a way to make them lighter without impairing the performance, and please don't make them more expensive, right? Now, and again, if that happens, all these changes will go down the entire value chain. Now, and again, I think this example here is also a good way of showing it doesn't really make sense to look at B2B marketing in isolation from B2C marketing, because obviously these two markets are connected. Another characteristic setting B2B markets apart from B2C markets is something they call multi-organizational participation. Now, if you look at what happens in B2C markets, decision processes are, in theory at least, quite simple. Now, there's a firm offering a product or service, trying to sell that product or service to a customer. The customer needs to decide whether she wants to buy it, yes or no. Now, in theory, this also happens in B2B markets. Now, let's assume there's a company that constructs and develops packaging plants. Now, and tries to sell that packaging plant to a beverage company like, for instance, say Coca-Cola, right? So they're the manufacturer and the customer who will be operating the packaging plant in the end. Now, but these are not the only two actors involved. Now, typically this will be a lot more complex, right? Now, for instance, it may be very likely that the customer, in this case Coca-Cola, will not only rely on the manufacturer to develop the packaging plan, no, but it will also consult engineering firms, consulting them, telling them on how the plant should be constructed. Now, given that these are sizable investments, there will also be banks, some kind of financing institutions involved, as will be business consultants or even local authorities. Now, meaning, what is quite simple in a B2C context, some kind of exchange between a company and a customer, becomes much more complex in B2B markets because there are more actors involved. What's also different about decision processes or buying processes in B2B markets is that they're typically characterized by a high degree of formalization. Now again, B2C decision processes are simple in the fact that assuming that you have the money to buy something that you want, you can just do so. I mean, there's not much more that you need to do. Now, this is very different in B2B markets, which are typically characterized by buying processes that are very formalized. Now, we're very clear, you just can't go out and buy a packaging plan. There will be very clear structure and rules according to how a purchase should proceed. Now, it will spell out how many vendors or how many manufacturers do you need to contact. What are the steps to adhere to? If you're asking companies to submit a proposal, what needs to go into the proposal? What are the criteria according to which you decide? Now, if you're talking about public institutions like university, this becomes even more complicated. Now, what I have here is actually an example of this university. A few years ago, they were looking, so our university was looking to buy a new software management system for, say, planning courses and giving grades, some kind of campus management system. Now, if you're enrolled in this university, you know what I'm talking about. We're talking about the campus management system. Now, this is far from easy, right? So a few years ago, they decided we need a new system. Now, what happens then? It's not just because we're public institutions, it's not just like this university or the buyers in this university can contact a software company and to say, well, please develop a new software for us. No, this is not how it works. Now, this is very complicated. Now, in here, they have a brief report on how it works. So what happens? They decide they want to have a new software. Now, the first step, what they do some kind of competition, right? Now, some kind of competition in a bidding process. Now, meaning, this university says we need some kind of new system, a software system, and this is, on a very broad level, this is what the software needs to achieve. Now sending all that out to a few select companies and so that they can submit proposals. Now that's only the first step, right? Now after all these companies have submitted their proposals, now this university makes some kind of selections, right? Out of the initial set, and then says, well, you've made it through the first step, and what we want you to do now is to submit an offer, right? Now, a concrete offer based on what you promised in the first round. And then we will look at that again. Now, I think there are many more rounds to go. I don't think they've made a choice yet. And so what it shows you is that these decision processes are very formalized and can take years until a decision is being made, not least because the financial risks are substantial.